He talked my dad in that I should join the Air Force. So he made application for the test. But anyway, so I passed the test. And about 15 days later, a nice brown envelope arrives. And I'm being shipped down to Biloxi, Mississippi. Now this is kind of a shock for a kid from northern Minnesota that's never been more than 300 miles away from home. Suddenly I'm going down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I was fascinated with those oak trees that had all that moss growing on it. Well, it was basic training down there, and it wasn't all that difficult, I'll give you a clue. But it wasn't like being in the infantry, the Marines, or anything like that. I was very good with the weapons, and I got medals for sharpshooting 3 or 4 different weapons, including the Thompson submachine gun and the 45, which everybody hated. And suddenly, we end up at Michigan State. Well, their training programs are so backed up that normally we should have gone from there right into pre-flight. But they were just so crowded. We were in Squadron C of 44, which meant in March of 44, if everything had been running the way it should have, we should have graduated. Well, we went up to Michigan State, and they had Army instructors. And that, I got a rude awakening for a guy that screwed off all through school. The sergeants didn't put up with me. So I learned an awful lot from those, for about 9 months with them. Spring or early summer, we were shipped back to Randolph Field in Texas. And so now they're still backed up. But we have to go through a pre-flight training, which consisted of half a day of athletics, another half a day of classes in mathematics, navigation, blah, 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 blah. And so we got through that all right, but along the way they kept chiseling out a lot of people for physical reasons or whatever. At that point we were down, I guess, maybe 50% or even less. For some reason, in the pre-flight, we took a real shellacking. And I'll never forget, the worst part of pre-flight, one of the things was that in the dead of heat, you'd have to run all afternoon up and down hills around San Antone. And if you didn't come home, you were out. But everybody survived. Not everybody survived, but most of them did. And so though finally we get into pre-flight, and I'm doing okay, not wonderfully well. Some guys are natural flyers. I was not. And so along the way in pre-flight, you have to learn code, Morse code. Now, Morse code, which is with the sound, I had no problem with. Morse code with lights, I did have a problem with, which eventually ended up where I am now, blind. But the signal, flashing light, would go on after a while, and I'd never see it go off. So that took care of me in my flying career. So what did they do with these cadets that physically or whatever? So they start sending you to tech school. So I went to, first one I went to the machine gun school, P-50. And actually I kind of liked that. It was down in Buckingham Field in Florida, right near Fort Myers. And we, eventually I became kind of an assistant instructor down there for a while. As a sidelight, if we got any money together where we could buy a case of beer, we'd buy a case of beer and go down to Naples. And at that time in Naples, there was a corrugated tin shack and Greek sponge fishermen were fishing out of that, and that was all there was at Naples, which I wish I had bought a little land down there. But anyway, so we did that for a while, and then at Buckingham Field, they were breaking in the tail gunners for B-29s. And that tail gunner's position on a B-29 wasn't radio controlled like a lot of the guns were. So they built this mock-up in these B-24s, and they'd come in, and the tails were so heavy, the tails were almost bouncing off the ground before they landed. So we did a little tour on that detail of teaching gunnery there. And so then they sent me to POE in Europe, 4 Europe, Langley Field, Virginia. And I was all set to go. And the war at that time had ended, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so they looked at the group, and some of us that had already this much time in service, they decided they were going to send us over. Instead of that, they sent us to Denver, where the B-29s were doing the work, and we were supposed to get along there at POE. Well, the Japanese in that war, so once again, I don't go overseas. So so that's my distinguished career.